All righty. So our special guests today are the Permission to Start Dreaming Foundation. But to begin with, we want to share a video with you that they brought. Go ahead.
PTSD in so many respects has become this catch-all diagnosis. What we need to do is we need to fundamentally change that world, that it's possible to grow in the aftermath of trauma.
The POWs are living proof that you can be in post-traumatic stress and not have it a disorder.
We need to educate people about post-traumatic growth so that they see the possibilities. There's more than the suffering that they're going through.
It's just an eye-opener to understand that there is another way to think about it.
It's not therapy, it's training on how to deal with struggle in life.
When you're alone in the dark, you need a baseline. You need to validate your sanity. You need somebody to tell you you're alive.
That's the power of humanity, that we can help each other get through these challenges. I want to transform the way mental health care is done in this country. Not just for veterans and first responders, for everybody.
The Permission to Start Dreaming Foundation was founded in 2009 by Leslie Mayne. And so I'm going to bring her up here. I've known her since then. And I just want to share with you the mission of the Permission to Start Dreaming Foundation is to help veterans and first responders throughout the Pacific Northwest access effective long-term solutions to transform post-traumatic stress into post-traumatic growth. Please welcome Leslie Mayne.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having us. And thank you, Kurt, for making it happen, and Miriam. I know a few of you. I've seen you through the years. 2009 is actually when this opportunity for post-traumatic growth began in me. That was the year that my son had already served in Iraq, and he had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. And he went from Walter Reed Hospital in DC to getting a 3-tiered program in Perry Point VA Hospital in Maryland. And I met with some very well-intentioned counselors and doctors at Walter Reed. He had tried to take his life, and that's what landed him there. I went back from Gig Harbor and sat in a room, as I said, with these very good people that were trying to help this soldier find his way. And their idea was to send him to Perry Point, Maryland, at the VA hospital there, and address addiction, sadness, hopelessness, suicidal inclinations, nightmares, anxiety, stress, all those things that we know wrapped up into the post-traumatic stress. And he was there from 2008, December of 2008, to March 2009. And I was working at the Tides. We referenced the Tides earlier at the time. I had a full-time job in Tacoma with the Muscular Dystrophy Association. But my side hustle, of which my kids were slightly embarrassed about, was at the Tides Tavern. And I got called home on a Saturday morning on March 7th because we had learned that Kyle had been discharged from the VA hospital. They told him he was taking up a bed and he could self-medicate. And he found a Baltimore hotel room on March 6th and didn't respond or wake up on March 7th. So that was 2009. And that's where the journey really began for me and my family. And I went into what I call my very blue place. Some call it a dark place. I refer to it as blue because I think there's hope with blue, but it was very dark. And I left Gig Harbor. I left everything I knew, and I went on a road trip to have conversations with God because my life had been so upturned and the pain is so great it should kill you. So I went south and I ended up in South Padre, Texas, and I spent about 6 months there trying to figure out what the next chapter of life would be, what it looked like, how I could honor my son's service in life. Because, you know, when you have a child that takes their life, either recklessly or intentionally, there is a lot of shame involved. There's a lot of blame, a lot of guilt as a mom. What could I have done to change that outcome? So I had all that wrestling with me, and I was also raising my hands to the good Lord and saying, okay, have your way with me. Show me what I'm supposed to do with all this, because it's a lot. And gratefully, he showed me that, you know, the love has to go somewhere, Leslie. So pour it into other Kyles. Find a way to have a better outcome. I wish I knew then what I know now about post-traumatic growth, about trauma, about pain, about hopelessness. But the good news is that I have learned an awful lot in all these years. And I get to share a little bit of that with you through a friend that I brought this morning, who God also introduced me to through her own tragedy. It's her story to tell, and I will let her tell it. I get back from South Padre Island with a sense that, okay, Gig Harbor is really my home. I know that people here in Gig Harbor really care about our veterans, about their mental health and wellness, and what could that look like? And as I referenced, I was working at the Tides, and Peter Stanley at the time was still there before his son took over. And he and Kathy Hayfield allowed me to work through my grief. And in that process, I came up with this idea of Race for a Soldier, of which most of you probably heard of, or maybe been slightly annoyed at through the years. We have it on Sunday morning. We're in our 13th year, and I'm proud to tell you that it is bigger and better than ever. And it's happening on September 8th again this year, or excuse me, it's September 10th. The prayer breakfast is September 8th at the Chapel Hill. So I come back, I started running. Kathy said, you love soldiers. What can we do for him? And I said, well, every time a soldier comes into the Tides, we ought to buy him a beer and some clam chowder and halibut and chips. She goes, well, I don't know if Peter would go for that, but maybe we would do a lunch and maybe we'd have a special day. So on October 15th of 2010 is when, oh, that's okay. 2010 is when we had our first lunch. We called it Lunch for a Soldier. And we asked the community to throw a little bit of money at it. I invited about 70 Green Berets from the base that were just about to deploy. And we had a wonderful party. They felt loved, they felt seen, they felt valued. And it was in those moments of knowing how this community would come and wrap their arms around the men and women that serve this country and stand in harm's way for us. That really triggered something in me in a good way. So I went to my friend, my new friend at Route 16, Miguel, and I said, Miguel, you don't know me. Sue Brayton introduced me, but I want to put on a half marathon and I want to call it a Race for a Soldier. And all I cared about is, are they paying attention to what's going on at the base? Are they watching these lives become unraveled and watching the lives become shattered after they come home? Something is going on. So guess what? Not only 15 people showed up, 1,500 people showed up that first year. And that's when I knew that we could find a better outcome and we could create an epidemic of hope. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I know I was on a search for it. And that's when I started to travel around the country a little bit and started to meet people that were paying attention too, because it wasn't just happening at JBLM. It was happening across the country, as you all know. I got to meet Ken Falk from Bluemont, Virginia. I was back there. That's where my son Kyle is buried. And I was actually just walking through the little town of Bluemont, going down memory lane because I'd brought my children there many times when I lived in Virginia. And I saw this beautiful arch, and it was Boulder Crest Retreat, wellness retreat for combat veterans. And I thought, oh my gosh, what is that? This was in 2013. So I dug a little deeper. I got online. I saw what Ken was trying to do. He was an old EOD guy, had some money, had some influence, and had a heart to fix the problem, he and his wife. So I developed a relationship with him back then. And through the years, as we grew out here, we added a golf tournament. We added a pool for a soldier. We started to see that the trauma that our veterans are experiencing is not unique. It's also happening in our law enforcement and first responder world. And so we started to, sort of expand our reach where we could. But at that time, we were just writing checks with the money that we raised for programs that weren't necessarily sustainable. They sounded good. Salmon for soldiers, climbing mountains, service dogs, kayaking, all those things are great, but they didn't have sustainable, long-lasting impact. So that's what I was looking for. And so when I met Ken and he met me, we were sort of the little engine that could, but he was paying attention to us. And we started writing checks for veterans from this area to go back to this program called Warrior Path, path meaning progressive and alternative training for helping heroes. Because I wanted to know, is this voodoo science? Are we drinking the Kool-Aid here? How can this be such an amazing program? And men that I respected from this area who are businessmen are now, veterans and now businessmen, came back and were reporting just extraordinary reaffirmation of their life, a purpose, a passion. They were able to lay down their burdens of what they've carried for years, and they were able to go forward in a way. They were able to have better relationships with their families, with their wives. It was actually saving their lives in an unbelievable way. So in 2017, we paid serious money to bring the A-team from Boulder Crest and Bluemont and brought them out here. We rented Harmony Hill out in Hoods Canal, right up the street from the Alderbrook Lodge. And we rented that for 7 days. And we put 7 veterans from this area through that program. And while it was a great experience for everybody, it was a heavy lift for them. That's when they started thinking, okay, how can we expand this program? How can we do this without killing ourselves doing it? And so there was a lot of learning through the years. That's okay. So 2019, I get a call from Ken Falk and said, we've just been given an incredible opportunity to scale this program across the country. The 2 founders of the Home Depot, Arthur Blank and Bernie Marcus, which they call themselves the Avalon Action Alliance. They are incredible philanthropists, really good men, and they care about the men and women that raise the right hand to defend and protect us. But they wanted to put their money where the data was and where the outcomes were. And they found the Warrior Path program. So Ken's proposal to me was, we would like you to be one of the 9 organizations across the country that we handpick. We want to write a check to help you do that, to find your team, to hire your people, to rent a space or build a space. And we want you to be the little engine that is doing it in the Pacific Northwest. So I looked at my team, which was, 1 person at the time. And she affirmed this was a good idea. I went to the board, and I'll never forget this. We were at the Wesleyan because that's where our board meetings were. And I'm sitting around with all these wonderful people that joined me a couple of years prior to say, hey, we're in. But I was writing putting my signature on a pretty big ask and lift, and it couldn't just be me. They were all in. So we signed. That was December of 2019. And then guess what happens? COVID. But the good news is we never stopped, and we fought our way through. And here we are now. And that's where I get to introduce my wonderful friend, because I could talk to you forever about this organization. I never knew what it was really going to become and how we're able to impact who we're impacting. But I trusted that there was a loving God that had heard my tears and knows my heart. And I'm telling you, as sure as I'm standing here, he has opened the doors continually. And our story really is just beginning. We don't have our own property yet. That's our next with our capital campaign. We're paying quite a bit of money for a place that we lease in Port Orchard, but that's coming. Part of the story, if I'll just go back almost 5 years ago, I got a call from a wonderful young woman that had shared her story of trauma and pain and loss. And she had run the race for a soldier a couple of times and knew a little bit about my story. And she just connected with me in her most vulnerable moment. And I knew after just speaking to her for a short period of time that we were going to walk on this journey together, and this post-traumatic growth thing was going to happen for both of us. In what way, I didn't really know. I'm going to let her tell the rest of her story. I think that, but the good news, she retired. We hired her, and she's working like a dog for us now. She didn't take a break in between her 40 years. So I'll let her tell you the story. Her name is Sadie McVeigh. And Sadie, I'll have you come up after this film.
Because for today, we begin writing a new story. Not a story of deep trauma, a story of strength. Story of being you again. Make that choice. Transform the struggles of your past into the strengths of your future. Boulder Crest Foundation. Write your new story. Visit bouldercrest.org.
So my name is Sadie, and sorry, and I'm a little nervous now just watching that, and I know that this is difficult. So I just will go on and say, so my name is Sadie, and I served in the Air Force for 41 years, 11 months, and 3 days, for a very long time. I served as an aeromedical evacuation technician, and I was super proud of the job that I did all of those years. However, I was deployed several times, deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, and 2 of my children followed, and they went in the Army as well. My son Bryce served in he served in Iraq, and when he came home, he just was not the same young man. In 2017, I deployed to Afghanistan, to Bagram Air Base, and while I was deployed, my son Bryce took his life and he shot himself. So I left the war zone with real struggle. And I came home to a war zone in my head. And Leslie is correct. My son died on Labor Day of 2017. And when I came home and before Bryce was even buried, I reached out to Leslie Mayne, to the foundation, because I knew that there was a woman in Washington State that had a struggle much like mine. And it is not okay to return back to your unit and to act like everything is fine and you go back home and you just carry on. And because I served in the service for so long, I also knew that they had a focus on resiliency, but I struggled with what resiliency really meant and the training that we did. And so Leslie called me on the day that my son was being buried and just told me that we would meet. And so I met her physically in October, and she just took me underneath her wing. And I struggled a lot still as a leader, trying to find those ways. I was a chief in the military, and how can my unit be better? And how are we not hitting the mark? And so in 2019, Leslie asked me would I attend Warrior Path. I did not know what Path was. I had no idea what it stood for, but because I trusted Leslie, I attended Path in January of 20. What I learned was on my very first day of being at Path is if my son had attended Path, my son would be alive today, and so would Kyle. That's the first thing. And although I was not ready to jump off a bridge, I was most assuredly struggling with my own loss, my own grief as a leader, how to be better. And that Path gave me a sense of calm and an ability to reset. And the beauty of Path is it's a training program, and that warriors focus and they thrive in training. And training works very, very well. It's a part of our DNA. It's how we move through things. And we get better because the military and/or as a first responder, that training allows you to be the best at your job. But it doesn't necessarily allow you to be the best at home when you walk back through the door. And so what Path allows you to do then, though, is to understand that, and there's phases of post-traumatic growth that it focuses on. And the first part of that is trust and connection. If you have trust and connection, you can almost make it through anything. And that is so important, to really be connected in a way that is different with your own family and with those that you care about. And then secondly, it's about education. So Path has 75 contact hours. And that education allows members then to understand why they are the way that they are, why they tick in the way that they tick. And then the next piece of it is regulation. We teach 31 wellness practices at Path, because you cannot handle life if you are always reacting to everything. How do you literally find a way to metabolize stress and use those practices that allow you to reset, to rebuild, and to start all over? Because struggle is still going to happen. Life is still going to punch you in the stomach. But if you're grounded, you can handle those things. And then Leslie said earlier, it's about disclosure. And that means dropping the things that hurt, the things that we've been carrying and are taught to put into our rucksack and into our backpack, and just to hold on to that stuff and suck it up. It's a suck it up mentality in that community. But if you can lay it down honorably, like I didn't lay down my son and just drop him, but I laid down the fact that I lost him in a way that was okay for me to take my grief and find a way to drop it and to give my son a legacy and to move through that through disclosure. And then it's about story. Because of your struggle, because of your story, because story matters, you get to take that pen and snatch it back and write a new story because of your story and not in spite of it. And then the last thing, it's about service, giving back. Because there's no better person to help somebody else than somebody that struggles. And that really is the phases of what post-traumatic growth is. That's what Warrior Path teaches. And it allows us then to take the things that we're going through in life and just be better. That commercial is a great example of that. You can be a better mother, a better father, a better husband, a better wife, a better community member, because you have the ability now to see your life in full, all of the things that you've gone through and how those things matter, because you would not be the person you are today without struggle. And finding somewhere in struggle that there's education in there. You just have to find those pieces that make it better. And that's what Warrior Path gives to people. And it is a powerful program. And I retired, as Leslie said, in 21. August, I turned 60. I'm super old. And so of August 5th and 21, I turned 60, and the Air Force said, you got to go. But luckily in July, I asked Leslie, and I don't think she thought I was going to ask, to be a path guide, because there's no better program out there that can help young people and or people that are in their 60s with learning about struggle, because it's never too late. And so I'm grateful forever for this woman, that our tragedies brought us together, and somehow our sons brought us together to be better. And so I get to say, because of my son, I'm better. Because of my son, I got to experience Warrior Path. And because of my son, I get to help other veterans and first responders because of my loss. And I'm not taking it for granted. But God, it's a struggle. It still hurts every day. Every day, I just, it's intentional. I have to find those ways to move in a right way. But because of my loss, because of her, I get to be a better person. And so I just say thank you to Leslie forever, ever indebted to her. And that's it.
So wait a minute, get back there.
Sorry.
I have a question. How many people are, sorry, I'm taking over your off.
Sorry.
How many people are on the team and who are the advice?
So we have, there's 6 of us on the team. Our program director, his name is Toby Moore. Toby served in the Army for 22 years, and he struggled greatly with suicidal ideation after getting out of the military, and actually while he was in the service as well. There's Will Abatey, also U.S. Army veteran, got out during the time that his mother was suffering from cancer, and then couldn't get back in and was hoping to get back in, but he helped his mom pass in the right way. There's Doc. His actual name is Will, but there's 2 Wills. And so Doc is retired Air Force, served in the Navy as well. He's an anesthesiologist, a nurse, but he has a big heart and also struggled with years of being deployed and with the loss. Most operating rooms only maybe lose somebody, 1 or 2 people a year. When he was in the operating room, when he was deployed, they could lose 900 people sometimes. And so there's big loss sometimes in those kinds of things. And so throughout his years, he's lost several hundred people working in the operating room. That would never happen here in the United States. And then there's Amy. Amy's a firefighter, a retired firefighter, an amazing young woman, super organized. And then there's Linda, and Linda is a police officer, just retired in December. And actually I've known her for like 20 years. And so just super, super cool. And then I already told you my story.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any additional questions? Okay, let's start with Kurt, and then we'll go to Larry.
That was so fascinating about the Mission Star Dreaming Foundation is how it started off with helping the veterans coming back from war zones, what have you, but you've branched out into providing these services to the spouses of these individuals as well as first responders and their spouses.
That'd be you.
So we've only really just begun with the spouses, but we've understood for a long time that they have an enormous burden, if you will, to carry when the men and women go into harm's way. And it didn't take us very long through the last couple of years, in particular the last 3 or 4 years, when we've seen such a change in the way a lot of our country looks at law enforcement. And so we've decided to take a pretty strong stand that, obviously training is needed in areas where it's needed. But you're never going to convince any of us that most men and women in blue get up every morning to see what kind of damage they can do out to humanity. It's just the opposite. They go out because there's something extraordinary in their DNA that we get to lay in bed at night. Our grandchildren are safe and they go out and take care of the bad guys. But the extraction of that is huge. And there's a lot of moral injury out there now for a lot of our police officers. We have a wonderful leader here in town and they know they're supported, but a lot of their friends in other counties and other districts are not. So in answer to the question for the spouses, knowing all of that is going on, we started what we call Matters of the Heart. And it's a once a month. Well, actually, it's actually about every 2 months now. We hope we can improve on that, but we allow them to come together. We serve them a wonderful meal. It's usually at a lovely home out on Fox Island of one of our board members, and just allow them to come together and be and share the victories and share some of the trauma. When we have our own facility, and that is our big dream, that's the capital campaign that's going to begin next year. We will have the resources to be able to perhaps offer a Warrior Path-like program to the spouses so that they will be able to deal with some of the things that are very hard for them right now to even articulate. So there's a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity. We want to serve them as well. And we are going to find a way one way or the other, but it's baby steps. And Sadi will tell you that 6 to 8 men or women go through the Warpath program every month. We have a 2-month hiatus right now because the facility can't, we can't be there, or we would be doing every month. So with a facility of our own, we can call the shots on that. But does that answer your question? We've only just begun to help the spouses and the families, and that is absolutely so important to us.
Thank you. Larry, you're next.
Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it. What are you begin is understand you're building to a regular residential. What are those communities? And is there any, do you see yourself reaching out and helping people who are not residential? Because the need is so huge.
So, so like currently where we go right now is at Pilgrim Firs, and even when I attended in Virginia, so it's an area. They have cabins per se. There is some cabins, but so basically there's a lot of classroom time. That's at 75 hours. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It needs to be kind of a way, because that way they don't get to use their telephones. Only when they get back in their rooms at night, they'll be allowed to use their phones and that. But during the day, it is literally that they are just training. And then we put a lot of pressure on the students throughout the day. And then we allow them, then that's where we also do the practices. We teach practices that allow you to metabolize stress, but we put stress on them. We make them disclose. It's pretty amazing. I would say, most students get there on Friday evening, and by Saturday morning before 11 o'clock, they have pretty much told their whole life story, just like that. That in itself is not a normal thing. And so we used to say it's a safe and trusted environment, but you can really do these in any kind of environment. And it's important to understand with trust and connection that you can actually house anything, anywhere. It's about being honest and being vulnerable and saying what you mean what you say without saying it mean. And it's important if you give somebody that place, it doesn't have to necessarily be like any facility, but the beauty of where we go like a Pilgrim Firs is it's quiet. There's no interruptions. You can't hear a lot of things that the outside world has to offer. And in that 7 days, they are in a place that allows for an environment that literally gives them that trust and connection, that allows them to tell everything and to lay things down honorably, if that may help.
It is. And if I can just add to that, we're the only organization of the 10 that don't have their own facility. I have visited Virginia and have visited the new one in Texas. And there are some things that matter. She mentioned it needs to be isolated, if you will, tranquil. Beds are really important, and who's cooking and the chef is important, because a lot of these folks have not taken care of themselves that way. And we know nutrition is very vital, and a good night's rest is really vital. It doesn't have to be all the bells and whistles that some of them have. Zach Brown offers his place in Atlanta, and that's outstanding. There are beautiful facilities. It just needs to be comfortable, and it needs to be able to house, the creature comforts, if you will, and then have it, because it reflects the Pacific Northwest, have it in a place where, 20 acres would be more, 15 to 20 acres would be enough. And the only reason why it could be that big is just so that there is that sense that once you drive on this property, you know that the gates behind you or whatever, the world is out there, you're in here, and it's a safe and honoring place. So, and again, I don't know what it looks like. I know there's lots of property in this area. I know we have a beautiful state. I know that door is going to open. And then I know that we've got people that would love to build it. It doesn't have to be maybe what I originally hoped it would be. I'm getting a lot more, a better understanding of what it just needs to be. Like Sadi says, it just needs to be a safe and honoring place. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Describe the therapy working lives and you explain what a word that came up.
I actually can a little bit. So it's not therapy at all, by the way. It's peer-to-peer training. Dr. Rich P.T.S.D, he was on the video there, the very first video. He's actually the guy that coined the term with Lawrence Calhoun of post-traumatic growth in 1995. They coined that term. And the idea is, once again, that you can get strength out of struggle, that some of the wisest people in the world had true struggle in their life, and that's what allowed them to become wise. And so how do you do that? And Rich P.T.S.D and Lawrence Calhoun, they actually, when they were in their tenure in college, they wanted to find out what made people happy. And so they went to some places where there was meetings held on men and women that had lost disabilities came much later in life. And how some of those people, that no matter how late it came in life, that their disability had now allowed them to be a better person because of their disability. And then they also went to parents meetings of bereaved parents that lost children, and saw so many parents that although they lost their child and they would rather have their child back, knew that that just wasn't the end of it. And they had to find some way to honor their children, and that happiness came then from finding ways then to help other people, and that's where service came into role. And so when Ken Falk then met Rich P.T.S.D, brought him onto his board, that's where they developed PATH, which is progressive alternative training for helping heroes. Because for many people that are serving, it's difficult if you go to therapy. First off, it can be career ending. It leads to a level of shame, and it's not that suck it up attitude that we are taught to put everything into our backpack and to compartmentalize so that we can just move on, right? We have a belief system in those communities that we somehow think that that's what makes us strong. And not being open and honest and vulnerable is really what makes you strong, and that everybody has struggle. And so when they figured out a training program, because that is what hones in, that's what makes a warrior a great warrior, and many people in civilian community as well. It's training that allows you then to capture that and to understand it. And we can stand up proudly and say that, versus therapy that might make us lose our job. And so that just that forum then changes that.
Thank you.
Well, and that's why I said not to put down therapy in any way, because I'm actually I'm in therapy as well, and PATH allowed me to do that. I will say that. But for many veterans and for this community, sometimes we'll get a therapist that has no idea what we've been through and cannot understand us on the same level. And although they say they understand and they have a lot of certificates, they have not been in the hole with us. And so that's what I say when I say therapy. And even in the VA, many of the therapists have never served in the military, yet they're the ones that you are supposed to give your underlying biggest fears, and knowing then that can come back on you possibly. As for me, I was a flyer, and ground you, and that I would never be able to fly again if I was honest. And so you just deal with it. And so for many jobs as a law enforcement, as well as if you go see somebody, and then it gets back to your units, they take away your weapon and they take away your job. Is immediately upon my son's death, when I walked out of the warehouse to tell my commander that my son had passed, the first thing they took away from me was my weapon. I'm in a war zone. And although I'm a medic, the one thing that can protect me, no matter what, was taken away from me within seconds. And I would say for some, they don't understand what that means. That's what's going to protect me when maybe somebody else cannot. And within seconds, it was stripped from me that fast, even without, and I wasn't going to use it on myself, but they don't know that. They just know that she's vulnerable and we're going to do that. And that's what I mean by therapy in our mindset. Not that therapy is not a bad thing. I've done EMDR now. I've done prolonged therapy. It's just a different environment, and it allows us then to be more open and vulnerable. That I then, after attending PATH, I went to therapy because I'm like, okay, I can do this because I can be honest now.
And if I could just add to that, even the VA now understands, thanks to a lot of compassionate congressmen and women that understand that they haven't necessarily been able to get upstream from what's been going on. So they offered a grant to a group of organizations. You had to apply for it. There was a lot of paperwork, very tedious. And it's the Sergeant Fox Suicide Act. And we applied for it. We actually received it several months ago. So it's now put us in a really great position to be able to hire a few more people. So even the VA is having a chance to rethink some of the things that they've done. They've tried to do some good things and they are continuing to. And I would just say that I'm really proud of P.T.S.D, and I'll give myself a small pat on that. But we had to make a decision somewhere along the line to not get really angry at the way our sons were underserved by the VA. And I've made that a conscious decision not to be that angry mom, because I know a lot of them. And people don't want to listen to anger. They want to find solutions. They want to hear hope. And that's what P.T.S.D has always been about, is that as much pain as she was in and the circumstances of finding out about her son when she's serving her country, but the VA underserved her son, and yet she honorably goes back. I mean, the whole thing is, to me, beautiful and tragic at the same time. But she made a conscious decision not to be an angry mom. And instead, she's turned this around to honor Bryce and also other soldiers. So the VA is trying to make a difference. But at the end of the day, there's been so many of the men and women that we see come through the warpath. They tried the VA for the counseling. It didn't work for them. And then they stay away from any help for a long time. And that's why PATH is attractive, because it's peer-to-peer training. It comes from the men and women that were in the trenches with you. So there's a legitimacy already, and the outcomes are amazing. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I actually wish we brought some of so we just finished our 26th class, and from post-traumatic growth standpoint, and you can see when somebody first comes to PATH where they are hopeless, maybe have suicidal ideation, whatever that may be, but really struggling, you can see how their scores are super low. And then after the 7 days of PATH, that it begins really to climb, and they have a sense of hope, and you can see that within their surveys. And then by day 90, where are they at by day 90? It's not just a 7-day program on site. It follows for 83 more days. And in those 83 more days, they watch a small video, 3 to 5 minutes every day, that allows them, because there's so much thrown at them in that 7 days, it's overwhelming to some degree. And did I get it all? Well, the rest of the 83 days lets them see the little video, and then they can kind of, oh yeah, that's right, and then they have 5 Zoom calls with the team that they went to PATH with, as well as with their one PATH guide. I am over 3.5 years post-PATH. I went with 7 other women besides myself. I am still very close and connected to those other women. They know more about me than even my husband does to this day. I will say, though, the students that have gone through PATH now, they know more about me than they want to, because it's really about, if you're opened up and you're vulnerable and you show the things that have helped you to get through it, it allows them then also to cry if they need to tell their story, because just getting it out, the shame that some of those things can hold on us, and shame is super powerful, but it no longer has a hold if you can say it out loud, and in an environment that truly is safe, and no one's going to take anything from you, and or no judgment, because we've all done things we're not proud of, if that helps.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. You obviously deal with a lot of depression, severe depression, P.T.S.D. Has your group explored the medicinal use of psychedelics that are psilocybin and all that's being used for severe depression and P.T.S.D. along with their peer-to-peer?
No, we have not, no, but I know that even in the VA now, they're looking at some of that as well. On my drive yesterday, we had a meeting a few days ago. They talked about psychedelics, using them for therapy, but obviously, that's way above us. No, we are just literally just PATH guides that have all been. Every PATH guide has been to PATH, and they just share your story. But no, we've not. It's literally peer-to-peer for Warrior PATH, and then Leslie may have more.
I know what's going on. I don't have judgment. I don't have knowledge. I just know that PATH is working. My son was on many drugs, not the kind that you're referring to, but it was never going to be a good outcome if he mixed those with alcohol and other things. But he was told to self-medicate, but I know what you're talking about. And there's reputable people out there that are touting it. It just didn't sound that we're involved with, so that's all.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Okay, Kurt.
So on both sides of my mother and father, their families all served in World War II. My mother and her sister actually worked for the Army during World War II. And those gentlemen that survived, they didn't have resources like this, but so they found comfort, I think, in chain smoking and liquor. And they hung together with each other. It wasn't until years later that we really found out what their stories were. And then Vietnam, I got out of high school at the end of the Vietnam War, and but I saw people ahead of me come back from the war, and obviously we're suffering, but there's no outlet related. Have you done any research? You might have done any research about those individuals and how it compares to what our young students have experienced coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq?
Yeah, so actually, Rich P.T.S.D, using lessons from the Hanoi Hilton, there's a book called Lessons from the Hanoi Hilton, but there was 591 fighter pilots that were released from Vietnam after 1973, I think like February to May, 591 men came home. And initially, their families were told that they would be completely crazy, pretty much, not being able to function in life at all. But the majority of those men, 4% of them had PTSD. The rest of those 591 men excelled. Many of them became admirals. They went on to be congressmen. They went on to be vice president, or even apply for a vice president because of their trauma and because of their struggle. And that is where, on that first video you saw, Charlie Plum. So Charlie Plum was one of those prisoners of war, and Rich P.T.S.D and them, they also found out about those men and how did those men make it from their struggle. The majority of the men that stayed there for the longest amount of time, so anybody that was there from greater than 2.5 months, those men had post-traumatic growth. The ones that were there just a very short time did not fold into the fold. And the reason that they did it was because of good leadership. First off, Admiral Stockdale was not an admiral back then, but he was an amazing leader, and he was a stoic. And so he really read those stoics. He made those guys get on the wall so that when they were being suffered and tortured, as soon as they came back to their small little 8x8 cell, they had to get on the wall and tell whatever it is that they told. Those other men then used that there, whatever that may be. And then they were able, as they were getting tortured, to carry on that same story. Because there's a lot of guilt and shame that when you break down and you break the code of military justice, when you tell every story that you're not supposed to tell. But those men leaned into each other, even though they didn't have the ability to do that, but they tapped on the wall. And because of them, 22 years after the war is coined the term post-traumatic growth from those men from Vietnam. And with the VA's grant, you're actually allowed to get some of those men into Warrior Path too. And so Ken Falk in Boulder Crest, they did host one of them. I think he's like 88 years old now, and he went when he was like 79. And so Ken recently posted that he went to go visit him, and the man is doing amazing. And so no, it's not just for Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Really, you can go back now for Desert Storm, Desert Shield, even though some of those wars were over like that, and Vietnam and the VA grant, if they meet a certain criteria, will be funded by the VA grant. And because, yeah, it should have been called post-traumatic stress way back then, and not shell shock or battle fatigue. But how do you do that? And so, yeah, absolutely. There is data per se, and we actually use it in our teaching. Yeah.
I'd love to. So the one that's coming up right around the corner is our Swing for the Soldier. It sold out in about 24 hours. Thank you, Packy Reader, and his great community effort out there to get people involved. That is held at Gold Mountain now because we've sort of outgrown Canterwood. Sadly, COVID hit and we had to make some changes. The next one is, Mike Mitchell is having his Rock and Rhythm and Blues Festival out there at the gun show, or the gun club, Sportsman's Club, sorry, August 12th. But for me personally, the event that I truly love is the prayer breakfast on September 8th. And actually this year we have a friend of Saudi's, Brigadier General Kathleen Flattery, and she is actually going to be speaking at the prayer breakfast, and then she's going to be attending PATH in October, thanks to connection with Saudi. We have some other incredible speakers. One is Jason Schlechterly. He's a law enforcement officer from Arizona, and his patrol car was hit. And while he was in it, he suffered over 45% of his body in burns. And he lived to tell about it. He's going to be at the prayer breakfast and share about how he has overcome that. We also have Lisa Hallett, who started Run, Wear Blue, Run to Remember. Her husband, John, was killed. She left behind 3 littles, and she has a fabulous organization, and she's going to be one of our speakers too. So that's September 8th, and anyone can come. Tickets will go on sale in August, and that's at the Chapel Hill Church. And that's a pretty powerful event, because it's the reason why we run 2 days later. So 2 days later, September 10th, we'll have the 13th annual Race for a Soldier. It's a 5K and a half marathon. And I think we'll probably get one of the biggest turnouts we've had. And there is a little birdie out there working on some paperwork at the Pentagon for a possible excitement when the gun goes off, and there might be a few other things flying in the air. Can't actually say that, but we've been sort of waiting for it. So we think there's going to be beautiful. It bleeds red, white, and blue. So if you want to come to the race on Sunday morning on September 10th, you won't be disappointed. And then finally, Pull for a Soldier at the Sportsman's Club. My son-in-law, Seth Dorset, city council member, little shout out for Seth. He is running that, and I'm sad to say that it's in October, and I don't know the actual date, but you'll start to hear more about it. But that's a fun competitive trap shoot event. So those are our 4 major events. And then the rest of the year, we raise money by writing grants. We have a full-time grant writer now. We have a full-time veteran and law enforcement outreach person. We have a full-time event coordinator and community outreach person. We have an executive director, Steve Easton, who wanted to be here this morning, but between his 50th birthday, his wife had planned a getaway, and his daughter just graduated. He didn't have the times, and we gave him, it's okay, because we've got a ringer here and a deep bench. So thank you. We'll get Steve in front of you at some point. He's a retired law enforcement officer, and this organization is blessed to have him as our executive director. So yeah, we're growing. Our best days are ahead. And I'm just really grateful that you gave us this much time and asked so many thoughtful questions. And I hope you'll be a part of our journey, because it's a gap that we need to fill, and Gig Harbor is leading the way. And we're sort of still the little engine that could, but we're actually doing it. So thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank Leslie and Saudi for being here. You know, I've heard, as I'm sure most of you have, I've heard Leslie many times, and I always find her so inspiring. So thank you. Okay, this is the time of the day when we find out what's going on in the community. And I'll tell you what, let's start with Miriam, and she'll give us a chamber update.
Leslie and Saudi, thank you so much for your presentation today and everything you do. It's an amazing thing that you're doing anyway. Okay, pulling it together. We will be moving the Public Affairs Forum on July 14th across the way behind the 4700 building. It's called The Court. It's a retirement community, and we will be in their theater room. A few of us went last week to look at it. It's going to be a great space, and they are going to have a small, I hesitate in saying continental breakfast, because it'll either be muffins or fruit or bagels, but there will be coffee, and it will be at no charge. and it's free to us. And so they're completely hosting us. So it's an amazing gift to our community. So that's and they're terrific to work with. At the chamber office, we too are having a golf tournament. Fortunately, we're able to still stay with Canterwood. So it's going to be July 28th. If you're interested in playing at that event, it's super fun. We're going to have we've been talking with some of the whole sponsors, and they have a number of things up their sleeves that's going to be even more fun this year. So if you have the ability to play, or if you're wanting to help and volunteer at the event, we would love to have you volunteer. So also July 7th, rather than our luncheon, we're going to have a give back day where we're going to be helping the Downtown Waterfront Alliance with the farmers market. So, and keep in mind, today is also farmers market. So I hope you're able to attend that. It's on social. I don't know if anybody saw the food video that went out. If you haven't seen that, it looks like amazing food. I was surprised by even avocado toast. So yeah, I know it looks amazing. So anyway, if you would like to help us on July 7th, we would love some help. We need a few more people helping load out in the at the end of the day for some of the vendors. So if you have some time around 5 or 6, I think is about the time. Check 6 is when the loadout process. So 6 to 7. It's not very long, but we'd love to have you. Kurt. July 6th. Yes, there we go. And so then it's July 13th. Somebody's got to keep me on point. So July 13th is when we're moving over. Thank you for doing that, Mike. All right. Call me out.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Leslie. And thank you, Sadi, for being here. By the way, you mentioned Zach Brown. Yeah. My daughter and I are going to his concert in September at the Puyallup Fair. By the way, it's the Puyallup Fair. It's not the Washington State Fair. Okay. Okay. So we're getting there early to try out to be backup singers. And we went to see George Strait on Saturday at Lumen Field. We got there early, tried out to be backup singers. We didn't make the cut, but we got great seats. Anyway, so, oh, wow. What's happening at Penn Met Parks? Man, this Saturday, we are having a concert in the outdoor amphitheater, Fleetwood Mac on the big screen. This is their original concert from the Rumors release album that was televised on MTV back then. It's going to be a big screen. We've got food trucks. It's free. Join us. And then in July, all the whole month of July, we're going to have every week music in the park. We have concerts, various live concerts. And then in August, we're going to have movies in the park at Penn Met Park. So join us. And by the way, next Friday at 1 o'clock at Galaxy Theater, Gary Parker has been organizing Senior Movie Day, free movie for seniors, 80-person theater. He does it once a month. And next Friday, Penn Met Parks is sponsoring it. So show up. We're not going to check your ID, by the way. So, if you're young, don't worry about it. So what's happening next week? Oh man, Chief Kelly Busey is going to be here. Last week we had Sheriff Troyer, and wasn't that fascinating? No PowerPoint, no notes, just tell us the story. So, and Kelly Busey's just like that too. So join us. It's going to be really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. And thanks again to our guests here for a very inspiring presentation. And thanks to you for being here. And we'll see you here again next week at 7:30.